Our presence as a species, as a human species, is becoming geologically traceable on this planet.
We live in the age of the Anthropocene, an age which in geological terms is now being fundamentally altered by human activity.
But it is not only doom and gloom. The Anthropocene is also about human ingenuity, about the power to understand, to rethink, to reinvent, and make the presence of soon 10 billion people on this planet more sustainable. A couple of images I just want to show that demonstrate the scale and speed and pace of change that we as humans have created on this planet. Coral reefs, something most of us never see, are aware that they exist. Climate change, acidification has led to extraordinary events of coral reef bleaching, which will affect not only the ecology locally, but indeed life in the oceans in terms of biodiversity, fish stocks, and also the natural defenses on coastlines. Let me take you to another image in the Amazon. A little innocent road is built. Great thing for local communities, great thing for business. And you might think that its consequences in terms of the impact on the ecosystem and the economy can be managed in minimal. And here you see unintended consequences. Very beneficial for some, of great negative consequence for most.
Through that lens of what is happening, we are beginning to also identify the priorities for change. And that is why we're here at the World Economic Forum, because what drives these changes is not just people, it is our economies, the kind of decisions we make, be it choices in terms of energy, infrastructure, urbanization, and many other aspects.
For me, the good news of that story is that so much of the damage that we have seen has actually occurred only in the last 20, 30, or 40 years. And that makes me feel optimistic that we can turn it around in the next 20, 30, or 40 years. This isn't something that is intrinsic to the entire history of industrialization. So this is NASA data that shows the increase in global temperature. We now know that the Earth as a whole has warmed just about 1 degree centigrade since the Industrial Revolution. But again, that's an average. What's most alarming about this is not so much the global average, but what this looks like in any one particular place. And what we know from the satellite data is that the actual warming in the northern latitudes of the northern hemisphere is reaching 6 degrees centigrade already. We have seen massive losses of Arctic ice just in the last 20 to 30 years. And in particular, the old ice, the thick ice, is rapidly disappearing. This has impacts on biodiversity, it has impacts on the native populations of the polar regions, and it has impacts on ocean circulation, which can ramify throughout the globe and affect things like the Gulf Stream, so that the ice in the Arctic can affect the weather in London.
And Arctic warming translates into phenomena such as sea level rise. Many people still don't recognize that we are now talking about at least somewhere around 1 meter. And this is a conservative scenario of sea level rise by the end of this century. Well, for many countries, it first of all means they will cease to exist. In the Pacific, in the Caribbean, for millions of people, it will destroy their entire livelihood.
So here are two model results for what the ultimate effect of a 2-degree warming on the globe would be as it plays out over the next century over two. And this is what happens to the city of Shanghai, a city of 24 million people today, probably 30 or 40 million at some point in the future. The blue areas are the areas that are inundated. So you can see that at 2 degrees, a level that we often talk about as the safe limit, we're looking at the inundation of nearly half of the city of Shanghai. If we follow a business as usual trajectory and move into the area of 4 degrees, we see that Shanghai is almost entirely inundated. And just think for a moment about the economic, the social, the political consequences of the loss of a city like Shanghai. And now multiply that across the globe.
Urbanization will double in the next 4 decades compared to what we have achieved since the beginning of human history and urbanization. That is the magnitude of change, but also the opportunity to rethink how we develop our urban infrastructure, resource efficiency in managing waste, energy efficiency in buildings, and also new opportunities with renewable energy.
We want you to be motivated, we want you to feel the significance of this issue, but we also want you to be thinking about ways in which there are pathways forward. Cities are much more energy efficient than rural and suburban areas, by and large. And how efficient they are depends tremendously on how people live and how cities are planned. So how we plan our cities, how our cities grow in the next 10 or 20 years can make a huge impact on our carbon footprint. If the major cities of the world can plan effectively and control their greenhouse gas emissions, the potential for addressing this problem in a very dramatic way is very great.
Isn't this an extraordinary opportunity to do things differently, more intelligently? and not repeat the mistakes of living in an age of plenty or the cornucopia of the planet. We need to manage risks. We have done it for millennia, and we also need to keep doing it now. Don't look to scientists to give you the 100% guarantee. What science gives us as a society is another way to look at what is happening and then make informed judgments, and ever more informed judgments. And that is something that has to translate into the public debate.
We have a lot of data sets available today. We can begin to understand the planet as a system, an ecological system, but also a social and economic system. To be able to depict those trends in visual images and also in trend lines over time allows people to relate to the information very differently.
You know, I've often had this discussion about, I don't believe in climate science. Sorry, this is not about belief. This is not about religion. This is about knowledge, imperfect as it is, upon which we must take decisions from which there is no point of return if we don't act. And I think that is where we have arrived today. And from there, suddenly, as the economists have often gotten it wrong, extraordinary opportunities arise. And few people realize that the solar industry in the US today already employs more than the entire oil and gas exploration sector in the US. Now, who would have thought that? Actually, more than half of all newly installed electricity generating infrastructure last year was renewable, excluding hydro. This is an energy revolution, and it is now happening in Africa and Latin America. And I think within the next 10 years, the energy companies, the energy business models are going to be disrupted fundamentally and changing our energy economy.
This is the foundation upon which I think humanity arrived in Paris in 2015 and took a number of far-reaching choices. Rational behavior in the absence of perfect knowledge, but with the imperative to act.
Well, okay, so what happens with Zachary Taylor as president? Taylor turned out to be much more pro-Northern than anyone expected. First of all, as I said, he was a sugar planter. What difference does that make? Sugar planters had a different set of economic interests than cotton planters or tobacco or rice. Sugar planters relied on a high national federal tariff. Cotton didn't need it to carry. Cotton controls the world cotton supply. They didn't care. The sugar planters, or a small group in southern Louisiana, are competing with sugar from Cuba, from other parts of the Caribbean, which is cheaper. They're still using slave labor down there in Cuba. It's cheaper, it seems. Maybe the climate is better or something. So in other words, they are frightened of competition from imported sugar, which the cotton planters have no fear like that. So they actually are in favor of a strong national government that can protect them and a high tariff, and all the other Southerners want a low. So Taylor is much more of a nationalist in that sense than many other slave owners. He's also a general. You know, he's a military guy. He identifies with Andrew Jackson, a general as president. And these guys were pretty tough-minded. And when some Southerners, when 1849 rolls around, start talking about secession or nullification if they pass a law barring slavery in the territory, Taylor says, forget that. I'm going to do what General Jackson did. Jackson said, I'm going to send troops in the nullification crisis into South Carolina. He's a slave owner, but he doesn't let South Carolina nullify federal law. So Taylor is not sympathetic to the radical Southerners who are becoming more vocal at this time. In fact, he comes to rely for political advice on Senator William Seward of New York, a Whig like him, but a strong anti-slavery person. Taylor's all sorts of political issues are coming to a head in relating to slavery in 1849 and 1850. This will lead, of course, to what we call the Compromise of 1850. But Taylor says, we're not going to deal with all that stuff. There's only one issue we got to deal with right now, admitting California. Remember they had this nice gold rush in California? Everyone's heard about the California gold rush, 1848, 49. Thousands and thousands of... California was quite unpopulated when the United States acquired it, except for Native Americans. There were a lot of them out there. But here's... Anyone here from Los Angeles? Let's get our lights down a little. This is Los Angeles. like in 1848. I mean, there's nobody there. It's nothing. I don't know what it is now, but it's nothing back then. Anyway, but as soon as the gold is discovered in Northern California, thousands, tens of thousands of people pour in from all over the world, not just from the East, from Australia, from China, from Europe. And suddenly there's enough population to become a state, and California elects, without any authorization from Congress at all, elects a convention, drafts a state constitution barring slavery from California, and asks for admission to the Union as a state. And Taylor says, yeah, cool, let them in. They got the population. That's the solution to the problem, just admit California. But many Southerners don't want California because it will begin tipping the balance away from, right now there's equality, so to speak, between slave and free states. But you admit one free state, there can be more. They don't want to tip that balance. Here are other issues that were thrown up in Congress at this point. What's going to be the status of slavery in those other territories acquired from Mexico, which we mentioned? Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, whatever it is. What's going to be the status there? Southerners are demanding a new fugitive slave law. In 1842, in its first case dealing with the fugitive slave clause of the Constitution, a case known as Prigg versus Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court had issued one of it. The Supreme Court is, it's amazing we respect them so much because so many of their decisions are completely irrational and impossible to understand. And this was a good one because on the one hand it says, hey, the Constitution says they got to have their fugitive slaves back, so what's the problem here? They got to have them back. And in fact, they said, any slave owner can just go into a northern state and grab a fugitive and bring him back. You don't need the government to do that. You don't need that. You just go and grab him. It's like if it's your property. If your horse ran away, you can go and get that horse and bring him home without having to go to court and all that kind of stuff. You can even go on someone else's property if your horse happens to be there, as long as you don't, get into an assault on the owner or something. That's what's known as the common law of recaption. Anyone here going to law school? The common law of recaption. You can just go and get your property if somehow it got out of your grip. But let's say you can't just go and grab it. It's not that easy. What if you want the government to help you out? Well, the decision said, well, no, actually, it's not the role of the states. It's the federal government. This is a responsibility of the federal government. The states don't have to do anything. It's a federal responsibility to go and get those fugitive slaves. So when they were told that, northern states began passing what they call personal liberty laws, saying, okay, we're not going to help. We got no judge, no sheriff, no law enforcement agent can assist in the rendition, as they call it, of a fugitive slave. That's what the Supreme Court said. We don't have to do it, so why should we do it? Let the Southerners worry about this. So Southerners are demanding now a new draconian fugitive slave law to get the federal government to go and do this, and also to override Northern laws interfering with the capture of fugitive slaves.